You're listening to the Unstoppable Teen Podcast, episode number 42. Welcome to Unstoppable Teen, the podcast for teenagers, parents and teachers. My name is Kevin Mincher. Every week we will bring you an inspirational person or message to help you experience more success and happiness. Thanks for hanging out with us. Let's get this party started. Hello, Unstoppable Nation, it's Kevin here. Welcome to the show. I'm really looking forward to today's episode because it's all about how to live your passion. Too often I hear young people say, I'm bored. And today we've got a brilliant guest to help you overcome boredom and get more excitement, more fun, more adventure, more passion into your life. Whether you're a young person listening right now, a parent of a young person, or indeed a teacher or an educator, there's going to be some brilliant tips, insights and advice from our guest, and that is Anna McNuff. Anna has recently been voted one of the 50 most influential travellers of her time. She describes herself as an adventurer, a motivational speaker, an author, and a mischief maker. If you want to know what it takes to go off and visit the world, what it's like going and seeing other places, you're going to love this interview. If you're fed up, if you feel like you're trapped and bored, if you don't like school and you don't feel like you've found something that you're really passionate about yet, you're going to love this episode. Anna has created a career for herself. And that came out of taking a traditional route of going to school, going to university and getting a typical sort of office-based job. But she realised she wasn't really happy. And she talks in this episode, in our interview, about some of the mistakes that she made during her teenage years, some of the problems and insecurities that she had back then, some of her biggest failures, and how eventually she discovered the courage to go and pursue her greatest passion, which is travelling, adventure and seeing the world. She doesn't just do it by jumping on planes though. She's a bit of an endurance athlete. She has cycled around the 50 states of America. That's right, all 50 of them, clocking up 11,000 miles along the way. She has ran 2,000 miles across New Zealand. She's just got back. As I jumped on the conversation with her, she returned just a little while ago from her adventure through the Andes Mountains in South America. She raises money for charity. She gives talks in schools. And so I was chuffed. Never will you meet anybody more enthusiastic and excited about life. She's so infectious that I know that you're going to be inspired by listening to what she has to say today. So, without further ado, please let me introduce you to the wonderful, the fantastic, the inspirational Anna McNuff. So I'm delighted to have with us today Anna McNuff. And Anna, where do we find you in the world?
I'm in the Alps, in the French Alps, eating fondue and running around in mountains.
Well, I would have expected nothing less because as I was doing my research about you, I found that you described yourself as an adventurer, a motivational speaker and a mischief maker.
That is true. I can confess to that. I am a mischief maker.
Tell me about your last bit of mischief and last adventure that you've been on.
So I just got back. I'm about 3 weeks since being home from having spent 6 months cycling along the spine of the largest mountain range in the world, which is the Andes Mountains. So they go the whole length of South America. But my friend and I, we cycled from La Paz in Bolivia, 9,000 kilometres all the way down to the very southern tip of the world in Ushuaia in Argentina. That
begs the question, one, it's inspirational, but two, why on earth would you do that?
Because the world is a huge, huge place and I just love to explore it at every possibility. And I picked South America this time because I cannot speak a word of Spanish. And the thought of trying to speak other languages terrifies me because I was terrible at it at school. And I keep trying to force myself to get better. So I thought, what better way to try and force myself to speak a language than to go and dump myself in a country for 6 months And the other thing is that mountains, I'm just obsessed with mountains. I love the effort. I love the sick burn in my lungs when you're pedaling up them.
Yeah.
I love the effort it takes to get to the top, and the views are just amazing. So mountains and languages basically was the reason we went.
You've been on some fantastic adventures before this. You've been cycled all the way around all 50 states of the USA, tracking up, 11,000 miles in the process. You did a run that was nearly 2,000 miles down in New Zealand, and all kinds of other exciting things around Europe and a little bit closer to home. What I'm hoping we can do in this conversation is get all kinds of insights and tips of why you think adventure and exploration is important. But before we do all of that and get some advice on what young people, parents and even teachers could do if they wanted to go and experience more of the world, I'd like to go back to the beginning, really, of what were you like as a teenager and how did you end up one day becoming the adventurer that you are today? So let's get started. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Kingston upon Thames, which is the southwest of London, a royal borough, lovely little place, got the River Thames running through it. So yes, I grew up around Kingston, and it meant that I had access to Surrey and the Surrey Hills. And my family are a little bit special in that I was born to two Olympians. So both of my parents are actually, they're actually Olympic athletes. So I'm the spawn of Olympians, which I guess puts a little bit of pressure on your life. You know, there was a sort of a pressure I felt growing up, not from my parents, but certainly pressure that I put on myself to actually do something meaningful. I thought, God, I've been given these genes. I've been given these amazing genes to go and do something with. My DNA says that I should be doing something wonderful. What am I going to do? So I had an amazing upbringing. I had so much access to sport and the outdoors. I've got two brothers. So I definitely grew up not thinking that I should do anything different to the boys. I just did what the boys did.
Yes.
So I was playing football in the boys' league from the age of 6 because there was no girls' league at the time. And I just did what the boys did. And I ran around and I played in the mud and went out on my BMX bikes and got consistently dragged on walks by my parents, which I hated at the time, but I now love the outdoors. So I have them to thank for that, really, my upbringing.
Wow. So I want to unpick a few things here, and I'm kind of curious as to what you were like during your teenage years, because we read reports. In fact, there was stuff in the news today about the impact of social media and negative sense of self-perception and body image issues and worried about what our mates think. And you clearly didn't necessarily conform to the norms. So I'm kind of curious about what were you like during those teenage years? What did you perceive as being your strengths back then? What did you perceive as being your weaknesses?
I'd say my teenage years, I'm smiling as I remember them because they were difficult years. I mean, I remember certainly age 15, I remember that my parents went to do my GCSEs as they were then, taking sort of 10, 11 subjects. And my biggest problem in the classroom, and still today, is that I don't like sitting still and being told how to do something. I would much rather get my hands in and get going and do it myself. So I found it very difficult sometimes. I really struggled with motivation. And I'd constantly get on my school reports. My reports would always be, she could do better, I think she's cruising. And I knew I was cruising. I could do well academically if I tried. And so what ended up happening was the subjects that I was really into and really interested in. And actually, if there were teachers, like my biology teacher, she was amazing. She would let us blow things up and poke things and stab things and bring them to life. I did really well in those subjects.
Yes.
And the subjects that for me, they weren't necessarily brought to life, I did really badly. And it was the only difference was my motivation levels. And I distinctly remember there was one parents' evening when my parents came home and I hadn't gone with them. They'd gone and chatted to my teachers by themselves. And they came home and they told me what the teachers had said, which was basically this, that they could see that I wasn't really trying in a lot of subjects. And I cried my eyes out because I knew I wasn't. I knew that I wasn't motivated, and because I wasn't enjoying things, that I wasn't putting all my effort into them. And so I basically had this big crying session, played a lot of loud music in my dark room, and had a bit of a brainstorm with my parents the next morning of what could we do to get me motivated. Because the fact is, if I wasn't interested in it, I just didn't try. And that's pretty much the same now, unfortunately. But I think that's about passion. You have to be passionate about something. And it's just finding the way that you can be passionate about it.
I don't think that you're unique in that, Anna, and I mean that in a respectful way. I think people are automatically motivated to the things that they're passionate about. And
Yeah.
and lucky for some, they're passionate about academic things that happen in the classroom. They love maths, English and science and all that sort of stuff. And so they are automatically, naturally motivated when they're in the classroom. But there's a whole massive, and I'm going to sort of suggest that a majority of the population is probably not motivated or passionate about those things. And if they're not careful, the young people can find themselves disengaging, thinking that, you know, they've got nothing to offer life. But you've proven entirely the opposite of that.
Well, yeah, and I think it takes you a while to find your identity. Certainly, when I remember through my teenage years, I was kind of living two lives. You know, I had this identity as being the sporty one. You know, I was a sporty Spice, if we're going with the Spice Girls.
Yeah.
But a lot of that took place outside the classroom. So people knew that I was on all the sports teams at the school, and that I spent all of my evenings playing football or doing rowing or anything else. But a lot of it took place outside the classroom. So then, as I was trying to find my way as part of a social group, I found myself feeling like I didn't really fit in, because we'd go out to parties and I would want to get up the next morning at 5 o'clock and go training. I didn't want to go out and stay out till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, which is what everyone was doing through those years. And so I got renowned as the girl that went home early, which was an identity that I grew into by the time I was in sixth form. But in my kind of age 15, 16 years, it was quite difficult, because I wasn't doing what everyone else was doing, because sport was more important to me than staying out late and you know, getting into drink and things like that. And so it was definitely hard. I think it took me a while, and I had to be patient and allow my identity to grow until I got confident with just being who I was, really.
So what would your advice be to young people that are listening right now that are struggling with something similar, that they don't necessarily feel like they fit into their crowd, they find that they've got a passion somewhere else that's not conforming to the norms? What would your advice be to them?
Oh, embrace your individuality. I mean, if I could go back now and talk to my 15-year-old self, I would say to her, how wonderful is it that you are not the same as everyone? Because imagine a world where we are all exactly the same. I mean, it'd just be a horrendous world. It's like something out of a sick sci-fi movie. No one wants that. What I think there should be in the world is people doing things that they are so passionate about they can think of doing nothing else. Imagine a world where everyone is that passionate and that fueled up. How productive would we be? How brilliant everyone would be, and how kind we'd all be to each other because we're so happy. So I think that starts quite young. So I would definitely say to anyone that's feeling a bit like they don't fit in and that they've got their own interests, just, you know, you don't have to scream about those interests if you want, but be quietly proud, and definitely be proud that you're different and that you've got something that makes you unique, and indulge those interests. Read about it, talk to people who are interested in it. If there's not your circle of friends that are interested in it, there are people out there, I can guarantee, that are your tribe, and you will find them as you go through life. So just cling on to it.
I love that. What advice would you give to parents and teachers that are listening right now, if they know that they have a son or daughter or a student that hasn't found that passion? You know, you found yours through sport.
Yeah.
But if I'm in a classroom and I'm not passionate about those traditional subjects and I ain't passionate about anything else, how do you discover it?
Trying different things. I think and it applies to, I remember when I first left university and I was just struggling, and I'd finished rowing and I was struggling with what to do. And my dad said to me, you know, don't worry about the first job you get. He said, it's just the first job. You know, you try it, you find out whether you like it or not, and you move on. And I think that's the same with absolutely anything in life. So I would say to anyone that hasn't found their passion, just try different things, because you will stumble across something that perhaps won't have all the elements of something that makes you happy, but there'll be something within it. There'll be, oh, I like that because it puts me around lots of people, or it takes me outdoors. Okay, but I don't like that about it. And then you move to something else. And gradually, as you try lots of different things, you will recognize that there's a theme, and it will take time to build. And so I'd say to the parents and the teachers, encourage the kids to try different things, and support them in if they have a crazy idea that they want to go and do something else. Like I'll never forget when I confessed to my parents I really hated doing gymnastics and I wanted to give it up, and they said, okay, you know, if you want to give it up and try something else, that's fine. And so I was given free rein to just try every single sport under the sun until I found one that fitted. And I always think there's no job description for life. You know, I think some people think that you're going to turn over a page in The Guardian and go, there it is, what I'm supposed to be doing with my life in black and white in a little box. And that doesn't happen. You've got to build that job description yourself. So everything you do, whether you enjoy it or not, goes towards building what it is that you want your future life to be.
It's one of the things that excites me for this youth generation today, that never before have there been more diverse, wide-ranging opportunities. That if I think back to my teenage years and the few careers that were available at that time, and it seemed like the world was inaccessible. But literally within one generation, with the birth of the internet and with the reduction in cost of travel and cheap flights and other modes of transport, suddenly, instead of having to work just in coal mining or the steel industry or something like that from my region of Britain, there's now thousands of things that I could do with my life that other generations haven't had the freedom or the privilege to be able to access. It's so exciting to be alive today.
It is, and it's amazing. And I'm reading a book at the moment called Choose Yourself, and it's about the fact that we live in a world of opportunity at the moment. And Seth Godin, who's a prolific blogger on this kind of subject, and he goes on about the fact that you shouldn't be waiting to be picked. You know, if there's something that you enjoy doing, if there's an art that you have to create, if there's something that you want to put out into the world, then pick yourself, put it out there, and carve your own pathway. I think gone are the times when jobs are so narrow that you slot into one and you do what you're told. Yeah. You actually can now carve your own pathway and create anything you want, a life you want for yourself in any way. And it's, you're right, it's so accessible and really exciting.
Now, while we're on the subject of books, you'd recommend that one by Seth?
Yes, he's got a book called Poke the Box, which is a really good book. It's a very, very thin book, but it is about actually just putting your art out there, not being afraid, not being scared of judgment. You have to just keep creating and keep putting your art out there. And that's the way that you find out what works and what doesn't work. You know, you're not going to learn by being frightened of failing, which is something I'm a huge believer in. You actually learn more when things don't work than when things do work. So yeah, Poke the Box is a really good book.
We're going to put that into the show notes so that people can find the link to it nice and easily. But give me some other titles of other books that throughout the years you've read and have inspired you or they've shaped you or changed your perceptions in some way or another.
Oh, I'm an adventurer. So an adventurous inspiration book is a book called Just a Little Run Around the World by Rosie Swales Pope. And she was a woman who her husband unfortunately passed away from cancer when she was in her 50s. And it made her question what was important in life and what she wanted to be doing with it. And so she set off on a run around the world in her 50s, having never run before. Wow. And really distance-wise anyway. And over 5 years and 20,000 miles, the stories in that book and the sheer bravery of that woman just inspired me to do something more with my life, because I thought, how is there someone out there who's constantly pushing boundaries, who's constantly being selfless and trying to help other people through fundraising and other ways? And I was at the time in my early 20s sat on my butt in an office not doing much particularly productive with my life. So that's definitely one I'd recommend. If you're a writer, if you've got any budding aspiring writers out there, there's a book called The Creative Author Mindset by a lady called Joanna Penn with a double N. And that book is all about the struggles you go through as a writer. And really, it shows you that every single creative person is the same. We all have self-doubt. We're all frightened. We're all really nervous the second before you put your thoughts and feelings out there into the world. But you have to keep doing that and you have to go through it and you have to find confidence in some way. So that book has definitely shaped my life. I'm trying to think if there are any other ones.
While you're thinking, I can't let that pun disappear without, I know it's passed about a minute ago, but you can't, you're a writer and your last name is Penn. You can't make that up.
I know, it's amazing. She's really capitalised on it. She's an incredibly savvy businesswoman, yeah, and her website is The Creative Pen with a double N. Brilliant.
So let's go back to you in your teenage years, because I want to get some of the highs and lows of your time on the road and some of these adventures that you've been doing. There was a big gap between you leaving school and actually becoming an adventurer.
Yes.
And so I want to fill in some of those gaps, you know. I mean, you referred a moment or two ago to your first job being an office job, but once you got to the end of compulsory education, what did you do next?
Well, so by the time I finished, this is one of my favourite sections of my life because it includes what some could see as one of my greatest failings, but actually something that I see changed the course of my life, and I'm so grateful for it. By the time I was in sixth form at school, I'd started rowing quite seriously, very competitively. And I managed to get myself towards the end of school. I was in the England rowing team. Mm-hmm. And then, so I needed to pick, so I picked a university based on which university were good rowing universities at the time. And so I would actually spend more time training than I would in my lectures at university. That's because I didn't have many contact hours at university. And so I ended up joining the University of London, which had a fantastic women's rowing team. And I lived in the rowing houses next to the boat club. Wow. And I trained 2 or 3 times a day alongside my degree. And so rowing became my life. And I actually ended up making it into the Great Britain rowing team.
Wow.
Now, I had this absolute dream, which I obviously got from my parents, that I wanted to be an Olympian like them. I saw the respect they got. I saw the admiration that came from other people when they mentioned that they went to the Olympics. And I also just loved the Olympic ideals. We learned about them at school. We learned about Baron de Coubertin and his view that sport should sort of transcend all political boundaries. Politics doesn't matter when it comes to sport. We're all one world and one race, and we should actually stick together. And I love that about the Olympics. So I desperately wanted to be an Olympian, and I trained so hard and I put everything on the line. And then after I finished university, I carried on rowing for 1 more year. And I'd been in the squad, the GB squad, for a couple of years, but I wasn't making the Olympic team at that time. And I was faced with this, after the disappointment of not making the Olympics at Beijing, I was faced with this decision of whether I carried on for another 4 years and went for the next Olympic cycle, or whether I actually gave up my Olympic dream. Mm. And it all came to a head one day when I was just doing a training session, and my coach asked me just to, as he had done every day, just go up and do another extra 10-kilometre loop in your boat. And I just burst into tears. And he pulled me off the water, and we sat on this upturned tinny launch. And I remember he said, "What's the matter, Anna?" And I just shook my head, and I was just crying. I said, "I just can't do it anymore." And basically what happened is the sacrifices that I was having to make that dream become a reality, they just weren't worth it anymore. They weren't making me happy. Every single day I woke up and I was miserable because I was constantly injured. I was ill a lot of the time, and I wasn't being able to go and do all the things I love to do, which is that I love to travel, because I was only getting 3 weeks off a year. I mean, the rowing season, you train all year round. And I just realised that actually sometimes you have this huge dream, and then you get closer to it, and actually the dream that you had, it doesn't look like you thought it would. And it's a really hard thing to look at it and say, well, hang on, I've always wanted this dream. This is definitely what I've wanted, but do I want that anymore?
It's a major distinction. I want to make sure that the young people that are listening get this one, because oftentimes we see the glossy side of the story.
Yes.
And we see the medals, and we see the financial rewards, and whether that's being an Olympian, or whether that's being a musician or a singer or an actor or an entrepreneur. But I'll never forget one of the most important lessons I ever learned, and I wish I could remember who said it to me. But they said to me, "Kev, you've got to choose your pain, because every goal requires a significant amount of effort, a disproportionate amount of your time. And the work that you're going to put in to achieve it is infinitely longer than the amount of time you'll spend celebrating when you reach in your case, for an Olympian, it would have been a gold medal. But that moment of victory is so fleeting. It's so short. But the amount of training you put in is massive, that you've got to choose your pain. And it sounds like you got that distinction that this pain isn't the pain for me, and there's something else that I really want to do. And clearly, when I read your blogs about your adventuring, there's a huge amount of pain involved in that.
Yeah.
Thousands of miles on a bike or running. But that's a pain that gives you a pleasure, whereas the pain of rowing wasn't. That's a really important distinction. I'm pleased, and thank you for sharing that with the audience.
No, that's good. And I think that's the thing, that rowing, and I realise it now, I look back and it was one of my greatest failings, because ultimately I failed. I didn't achieve the dream that I'd set out to do. And it was a dream that I told everyone. My teachers expected me to make it to the Olympics and things like that. And so actually to turn around to say to everyone, this isn't my path anymore. This isn't quite me. I know there's something else out there. And I think it's the hardest thing to step away from a life. I knew what my life as an athlete looked like. I didn't know what was on the other side, but I just had to follow that feeling that there was something different out there that was more suited to my personality style. And you're exactly right. It's adventure. I love putting my body through pain, but I also love being able to be creative and to write and to go and speak to people. And rowing wasn't giving me that freedom. So I do not regret that decision, but it was the most formative decision of my life, I'd say, giving up rowing and letting go of a big dream.
Every one of these interviews I've ever done with anybody like yourself that's been incredibly successful at something has had at least one of those moments, if not multiple, where they had one thing that they thought they wanted, where they say they failed at it and let go of that goal in order to go and pursue something that was more meaningful for them. And therefore, for me, that's not failure. That's just an essential part of the journey.
Yeah.
It feels like failure at the time, but it isn't. So what I'm curious about, when you made that decision, what happened next?
Well, I feel like this huge weight is lifted. I mean, I think one of the most important things for me naturally was to talk it through with my parents, because they were such a source of support through my whole sporting career. But it was quite terrifying, because this huge weight lifts, and suddenly you go from being an athlete where you're training 2 or 3 times a day and you have a very rigid sort of lifestyle, to literally the world was my oyster. I mean, I could do anything at that point. And then it's the question of, well, if I can do anything, what on earth am I going to do?
It's a great question.
Yeah, choice is a terrifying thing. So I went through 2 phases. So I then actually thought, well, I guess I have to get a job. That's what you do, isn't it? You go through school, you go through university, and then you just get a normal job. And so I did that for a bit. I applied for thousands and hundreds of jobs, application forms everywhere. And I managed to get on a graduate scheme at a really big corporation, which was a fantastic graduate scheme. And it was very exciting for about 5 years. But again, when I got to the end of that 5 years, I realised that I'd gone into something because it was what was expected of me and what I thought you should do. And I hadn't actually stopped to think. I got so panicked about having so much choice that I'd just done what everyone else did. And I'd completely lost my way after those 5 years. I'd lost being a person who loved being outdoors and loved the pain. And I realised, that I needed to embark on a new life path. So again, I stepped away from my steady job, my steady income, and decided to start going off on big, crazy, madcap adventures.
So how did you discover that travel and adventure was your thing?
Well, it started with, I read a book called, it always starts with a book, doesn't it? Yeah. I read a book by Mark Beaumont, who broke the round the world record for cycling around the world.
Yes.
And until that point, I'd never realised that was a kind of travel that people would do. I'd only ever heard of the travel where people take their backpacks and they go and get on buses, and you kind of you go to the same places that everyone goes to, and getting off the beaten track was quite a difficult thing to do. And I'd done some travelling. I'd taken a gap year and I'd gone to Australia, and I'd done some travelling, but I didn't really like just normal travelling. It wasn't for me because I couldn't exercise all the time, and I felt trapped by I hate being on buses. I get travel sick anyway. So I think reading Mark's book really showed me that there was a different way to adventure. And I thought, well, people can cycle and they put all their bags on a bike and they go cycling around the world. That's bonkers. I'd like to do that. So that's what started me with, that's what basically planted the seed. And it just started with a seed of, I wonder if I could ... And that was it.
That right there, that I wonder if I could, and the way you phrased it earlier on about, I could do anything. Now I could do anything. What am I going to do? They're brilliant questions that start stretching the creativity in the mind and putting you into different places that many people don't even consider. So what were some of the first adventures you went on that led to you getting hooked?
Well, my first thing, I think, which showed me that I needed to let more of an adventure in my life was that my boyfriend at the time, he worked up in Birmingham and I was living in London, and we were going to take a little bit of a break and I was going to go up there and join him. And I just looked at a map and I noticed that there was the Grand Union Canal, which started at my workplace in West London near Brentford, and actually ran all the way to Birmingham. Yeah. And I looked at it and I thought, why am I going to get on a train and go to Birmingham and go and visit him there? Why don't I just cycle up it? And so at 3:00 in the morning, when my alarm went off, I sort of nudged him and I whispered in his ear, I said, I'm going on an adventure. And I set off on my bike at 3:00 in the morning to cycle up the Grand Union Canal while he went and got on the train. And I met him in Birmingham at 4:00 that evening, having cycled for 12 hours. It was a complete disaster. I got so many punctures. I got really saddle sore. The canal path along the Grand Union Canal actually turned into grass at one point. So I was having to cycle out of the saddle, which meant my abs got a really good workout. But I think that was the first time when I realised, why would you sit on a train and go to Birmingham when you can cycle up the Grand Union Canal for 134 miles, And that was the first time I thought, that is a much better way to live my life. So that's what started it. But then the big aha moment was when I was sat in my office job. I had the idea to go and ride a bicycle through every state of America. And it took, yeah, as you do, you know.
Paint that picture for me. Paint that picture. What? You don't have to name the company, but what are you doing at that time? What's your life like? What's the routine you're in? And then that epiphany moment of going around America. Tell us that bit of that story.
Every morning I must be at my desk at 9 o'clock. I probably would wake up and I'd cycle maybe 2.5 miles into work. And that 2.5 miles was the greatest joy of my whole morning because I was free and outside. I then I have to be at my desk at 9 o'clock. If I was there a few minutes past, then I'd get told off, even though I'd probably been working till 7 or 8 o'clock the night before anyway. So I'd get into my desk and my day would be filled with perhaps doing some work on Excel spreadsheets or going into meetings, talking a lot about selling products that perhaps don't benefit the world and that we probably don't actually need. They're a luxury product. And so the work I was doing wasn't exactly fulfilling, but worse than that, I was sat down all day staring at a computer screen, and I barely took lunch because there was so much pressure and workload to do. And I did really love the people I worked with. You know, we had some great times and great fun, but I was inside all day, every day, staring at a little box and pretty much being told what to do. You know, there wasn't much free reign for creativity, for ideas, because with big companies come big hierarchies and budget constraints and things like that. So that was my life. And I just looked at myself sat there and I thought about myself as a kind of 8-year-old kid with my brothers ragging around on our BMXs in the mud and going exploring and adventuring. And I thought, what has happened to me? You know, where is that person who loves the outdoors and who wants to be creative? She is buried somewhere under all of this paperwork.
And so how did you decide, I'm going to get my bike and go to America?
Well, I'd had the idea of the cycling from reading that book about Mark Beaumont cycling around the world.
Yes.
And then I told you I was terrified by choice again at this point because I had the aha moment. I had the idea that, okay, this isn't working. I need to do something. What am I going to do? Which is just terrifying again when you remind yourself that I think I realised, I thought, I don't have to be sat here. You know, my parents aren't telling me to be sat here. There's no teacher telling me to be sat here. I can actually not be here if I want to not be here. You know, it may take some sacrifice, it may take some time, but actually everything we do is a choice. So I went home and I got a world map out and I spread it out on my living room floor and I looked at all the different countries and I trusted my gut and I thought, how do I feel when I look at that country? Am I excited? Am I intrigued? What do I know about that country? And there was one country that I just kept, every time I looked at it, I thought, oh yeah, America. I thought, oh, the USA, crazy country, loved it, been a couple of times when I was a kid. And I kept saying, oh, I'll go there someday. I'll go to that national park someday. I'll go to this park another day. Yeah. And then there were so many places that I said, I must go there someday. In America, I thought, well, that's it then. I've got to go there now. I've got to explore it now. And because I was working in marketing at the time, I like a good hook. And I thought 50 states of America in what would be sort of 6 or 7 months. That's a pretty good challenge. So yeah, it just ticked all the boxes of a country I really wanted to see, a physical challenge, and something that scared the living death out of me to go and do it. And that was it.
So once you've got a goal, and I think this is going to be really important for young people, actually for the adults that are listening as well, we don't often know how to chunk that big goal down into something manageable that we then actually go and do. We have these big fanciful dreams, but then don't have a plan and then don't take the action that's necessary. You're there in your living room, you've got the world map, you've decided America, you've decided on the number of months it's going to take. Then what? How do you actually get yourself prepared? Because I'm assuming you didn't just quit your job and then the next day jump on a plane and go to America and start cycling. There must have been something else that happened then.
No, I was very logical, actually. And I don't know where this came from, but I thought I was obviously terrified. You know, I'm stepping away from a life I know and something that I know I'm capable of towards doing something that I have no idea whether I'm capable of it at all. And there are so many elements to an adventure. It's not just the physicality of it, you know, it's the logistics of being out there by yourself as well. And so I thought, right, I've got all this fear. Let me explore that fear. Where is this fear coming from? So I wrote down in my notebook every single thing that was a reason for me not to go and do that dream, not to go and do that thing. I wrote that down in one column. And then in the column next to it, I wrote down what could I do to combat that barrier, that reason for me not going. So one of the barriers, of course, was, well, I've got a really good, steady job. And so in the other column, and this is, you have to take completely all the critic away. You have to just let your mind go free. In the other column, I wrote down, well, I could quit my job. That is an option. At the moment, I'm choosing not to quit. I could quit my job. I could ask for a sabbatical and see how that would go. I'd never heard of them giving a sabbatical before, but I could ask. Yeah. So those were two options. And then it was, well, I don't have any money. And I thought, right, well, my options are you either spend less or you earn more. So I thought, right, I could put in place a savings plan for myself. I'm terrible at saving. So I thought, right, I probably need to go and earn more money. So I thought I could get a second job at weekends if I want. So I went through every single barrier. I had a mortgage at the time that I had to keep up payments with. I had a house, and I thought, well, I could rent that house out. That's an option. So I did that with all of my barriers. And then I went back through and I started thinking, I left it a couple of days and I started looking at seriously whether I could actually put those things into motion. And as it turned out, if you want to do something badly enough, I mean, it took me a whole year before I was able to go, but I put all of those things I could do to combat the barriers. I put them into motion. Which included getting a second job at weekends in a bike shop. So I learned how to fix bikes as well as earn a bit of extra money.
I love that. If you don't mind, what I'd like to do is create a little template of that activity that you've just described, and we'll make it available in the show notes to this episode. That whole thing of having a goal and then making sure you put a line down the middle of the page, and on one side, why would I not do this? And outlining all those fears and bringing them to the surface. And then on the other side of the page, writing down what you can do to combat that. So you eliminate those excuses and you come up with a plan to actually make the thing happen. And I think you kind of started the saying, and I'm not sure you finished it off, but if you really want something enough, you'll find a way, won't you?
Absolutely, you'll find a way. And I believe that 100% now. It may take you time. It will take you sacrifices. And I get a lot of, how do you do what you do? It's such an amazing life you live. But there are sacrifices that are being made. But that's a choice. But it's the law of the universe, isn't it? Yeah. If there's a fear there is something out there that will alleviate that fear. Or if there's a barrier, there's a gate to open it, or a wall to be broken down. So yeah, I think that's a great. Feel free to use that one, definitely.
Thank you. And I think that the thing is that if a young person out there is not prepared to do whatever it takes, then one of my conclusions is well, then you don't really care about that goal enough. You say you want it, but you don't really want it. If you really wanted it, then you would do it.
That exactly. And that's okay. That means that's not the thing for you and you've learned that and you can move on to something else. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So how long did it take from you making that decision on the living room floor to actually getting on the plane to America?
It was a full year, and it was such an exciting year. I don't think I slept at all because I was working 7 days a week. I had my Monday to Friday 9 to 5. I'd then taken a weekend job in the bike shop, which had me working 9 till 6 Saturday and Sunday. And it then meant that, which was great because I never went out and spent any money and ate beans on toast the whole year. And it took me that long. And also I decided with my job, I thought, right, well, I'm going to tell them I'm going to leave because this thing I want to do, this wasn't just a flash in the pan. I knew that I wanted to change the direction of my life. So I told my workplace that I gave them a huge amount of notice, and everyone said to me, you're crazy, they'll sack you on the spot, and I gave them 9 months notice and said, look, I'm going to leave next summer and I want to tell you out of respect. And they offered me a sabbatical. They said, would you consider going off on your trip and coming back to your job? And I thought, well, do you know what? That's a good way to test it out. And that came out of the blue. So yeah, it took me a year because I would because I was working so much, I would stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning doing all my planning, looking at the route, trying to work out what I needed to buy equipment wise, trying not to read too much because it scared me a little bit. But yeah, a whole year, but it was the most exciting year of my life. And yeah, it's brilliant. Once you have a plan in place, it's amazing how much happier you feel when you've got a direction.
And that is so important that listeners understand that, and that parents and educators, we're in this era of instant gratification where I want it all and I want it yesterday.
Yeah.
And here's somebody who's got to the top of their, you've been listed now as one of the 50 most influential adventurers in the world, and you've gotten to the top of a particular industry that's a really niche micro industry, but you're incredibly successful at it. And it took you a year to even get to your first trip, not a year to become the top of the industry, a year to get started on your first trip.
Yeah.
And it's because you're prepared to do that you've ended up getting to where you got today. Tell me about your trip around the States. What were the highlights and what were some of the challenges that you experienced on the journey?
Oh, the highlights were, Alaska. Alaska was my first state, and that is one of the most amazing places I've ever been. I saw 3 grizzly bears just riding along in the national park there, and there's just grizzly bears by the side of the road, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
But they're just majestic creatures, and coming from the UK, we don't have that kind of stuff. So Alaska was fantastic. The other thing that was amazing about America was the kindness of the people. I knew so much about America from my trips that I'd taken when I was younger, but also the whole Hollywood movies. We see the bright lights of New York City, and you've got Arnold Schwarzenegger, all that jazz. But actually, I learned that it's a country made up of incredibly small, tight-knit communities who will bend over backwards to take you in and treat you like a long-lost daughter. So I learned a huge amount about how kind the people were, and that was a real highlight. And what turned out that I thought was going to be the most frightening part of the trip, which was that I had to take this road across the desert called Route 50, it was named as America's loneliest road because there are sort of 60 to 80 miles between towns, not much out there. And you go across the Great Basin Desert in the Nevada desert. And I thought it was going to be the most terrifying week of my life. And it turned out all of the things I was frightened of, everyone said, oh, you're going to get shot out there, or someone's going to attack you. There's no one out there. It's just beautiful, peaceful, serene desert landscapes. And every morning I would just wake up and be on the road before sunrise and see the sun come up over this peak in the distance. And I just have nothing beyond the sound of the whir of my wheels. And it turned out to be the best week on the whole bike was that week across the desert. And it was the thing I was most frightened of. So that was definitely a highlight.
I think there's a truth in that in many areas of life. Like for me, public speaking as a teenager was my greatest fear. People don't believe that when I tell them now. I had more ways of getting out of speaking out loud in class and doing some reading than anybody else. But my greatest fear became one of my greatest joys. And you've just shared that with the desert story. Do
you know what as well, Kev? I'm going to admit that I'm a speaker now. Yeah. And at school, I used to avoid it like the plague. I used to hate it. I was the games captain of my school, and I would have to once every week read out the games result, and I would dread it. I'd stand up there, my hands would shake, my voice would go, and I would just absolutely hate it. And now speaking is my favourite thing to do in the world, aside from writing. It's crazy, isn't it?
It really is. It is. We got to shake off those shackles and stop scaring ourselves and go and join in and do stuff. You find the joy that way.
Exactly.
So after America, you came back, they allowed you to have the sabbatical.
Yes.
But you then ended up turning adventure into a full-time profession. How on earth do you do that?
Well, this goes with your last point, which is that Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. And I think the journey to being a full-time adventurer has been a very long one. And it started with me thinking, I'll just go on this one adventure and then I'm sure maybe I'll get it out of my system. I don't know. And then I came back, and straight away after being back in my corporate work, I thought that felt amazing. I mean, those 6-7 months on the road were probably the most exciting months of my adult life. And now I'm back doing something that I don't particularly enjoy again. So that planted the seed. And then I transitioned so that I had more flexibility in my corporate work. So I moved to contract freelance work so that I could, I had this plan that I would contract for half a year, save up my money, go adventuring half the year. So it became a kind of hybrid life.
Yeah.
And then that carried on for a couple of adventures. And then by the time I came back from New Zealand, I did this exercise where I sat down with a load of Post-it notes in a coffee shop, and I wrote on those Post-it notes everything I want to do in the next 5 years of my life. Everything, every dream I have, every tiny idea, anything to do with places I wanted to speak or places I wanted to go adventuring or money I wanted to save, anything. And I sat back from those Post-it notes and I read them through, and I thought, oh, this is very exciting. And then I realised that there was nothing on any of those Post-it notes that related to my day job as a marketeer. And I thought, what are you doing? This doesn't relate to anything in the direction you want your life to go. And so as I've done more adventures as well, then things just build naturally. People will tend to ask you to speak because they've heard about your adventures, but it takes so much time, and you can gradually begin to generate an income from something that you're incredibly passionate about. But it does take time, and I'm not there yet. I'm still on a learning journey, and every week, every day, I'm learning something new about how to build a life that I'm passionate about. So it's a slow burn. Yeah.
So while you were down there in New Zealand, you didn't have the bike that time, did you?
No, I was on foot. Running. I ran a trail that was about 2,000 miles long with all of my equipment on my back in a backpack.
Completely self-sustained for
Yeah.
carrying it all for 2,000 miles. And on each of these trips, you raised money for charity as well, didn't you?
I did, yes. On the first trip, I raised money for a charity called Right to Play. And the idea behind that was that I'd had so much access to sport and the outdoors when I was a kid, and I wanted to do something that gave that back to other kids. So I raised about £20,000 for them on the first one. And then on the second trip to New Zealand, I did a similar thing with Outward Bound, because I wanted to find a charity that operated both in New Zealand and in the UK, so that I could raise funds for kids in the UK and in New Zealand to help try and send them on their own life-changing adventures.
Brilliant. Now, they're big adventures, you know, your 50 states and the 2,000 miles along the trail in New Zealand. And of course, you spoke earlier about following the Andes Mountains. If I was a young person listening right now, I might think, yeah, I'd kind of like to do that, but maybe that's 5 years away or 10 years away or even longer than that.
Yeah.
What are some examples of mini adventures that I might be able to do closer to home? You talked about following the canal from London to Birmingham, but what are some other little ones that you've done that have brought some fun to your life?
Yeah, I love mini adventures because they keep me sane between the big ones. So I've done things like I dressed up as a Roman soldier and ran the length of Hadrian's Wall, which is 86 miles. And you know where that came from? That came from, I didn't like history at school. I was terrible at it because I just used to make up all the information. And my history teacher would say, Annie, you have to be accurate. They have to be sources. And I'd say, why? It's much more fun if Henry VIII said that. And so I didn't pay much attention at history, but I love history now. Yeah. And I thought, I want to learn about Hadrian's Wall, one of the greatest feat of engineering of the past 2,000 years. I thought, I want to go and learn about it. And I really want to immerse myself. So I'm going to dress up as a Roman soldier with my mate. And we went all the way along. We went into all the museums, and I read a book about it as I ran along as well. And we just had the best time. So that started a bit of a theme that running in fancy dresses is a good idea. So I then decided to go and run the length of the Jurassic Coast in the southern UK, dressed as a dinosaur in a dinosaur onesie. And I did the same thing. I thought, right, well, I'm gonna learn about the Jurassic Coast. So I read all about the different types of fossils then, and basically the way we ran it, we were running back through time. You know, the way the coast had been formed.
Brilliant.
So I think in terms of small adventures, it's just coming up with something that really tickles your fancy. There are so many resources out there, our footpaths and our long distance walking trails, or even our short national heritage trails in the UK. There are a huge amount of them. And I just would find one that really tickles your fancy and you think, Joe, I'd quite like to learn about that. And then grab a mate or find an interesting way to do it, whether it's running, cycling or whatever else, and just go and explore, be curious. I think that's the thing. It comes from a desire to learn. And I just happen to learn by dressing up as Romans and dinosaurs and going and doing those kinds of things. So yeah, but the small adventures are great. That's
fantastic. And of course, I would be being a little bit irresponsible if I didn't say that young people that are listening, if you are going to go on an adventure, make sure parent, carer, mum, dad, or a responsible adult that looks after you knows exactly where you're going and what you're doing so that they can keep a track of you, keep you safe, and make sure you come home in as many pieces as you're supposed to come home in.
Definitely. And I still do that now. I'm 32 years old and my mum still knows where I am every single night, even if I'm in the middle of the bush. So that is important.
It's all too easy to get caught up in the same old routine of the same old people doing the same old things. It was a couple of weeks ago, and I was chatting with a student at a school where I do some of the motivational work and life coaching work that I do with students. And he's like the class clown. He's for want of a better way of putting it, the village idiot. He has a very strong amount of power in his peer group and unfortunately was using it for negative reasons. The reason I bring him up, and let's call him Scott. It's not his real name, but let's call him Scott. I said to him, Scott, what is it? You're very powerful in your peer group, and I'm just curious about why you're choosing to use that for negative purposes and bullying and intimidating people rather than using it for positive purposes. And he said, you know what the truth is? He said, I'm bored.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to find a way to have some fun. And I've realized that, in the classroom, I hate sitting at a desk and sitting still. But then when I get a chance to go home at night and I call my mates up and I say, do you want to go skating? Do you want to go cycling? Do you want to go running? Do you want to go and watch this movie? Do you want to go bowling? They're all like, no, I'm just going to stay home. No, I'm keeping this Snapchat streak going, or I'm playing this computer game. Or he said, the truth is my mates are boring.
Yeah.
And I'm just fed up of it. And I can't wait to get out of this school so I can get a new peer group so we can actually go and have some adventures. And I'm like, now you're looking at using your energy in positive ways rather than in negative ways. And so I hope that the young people that are listening are inspired by your story and a little bit by Scott, that life doesn't have to be boring. You don't have to conform and watch the same TV show and subscribe to the same social media channels and do the same stuff. In fact, the majority of people that are doing it are complaining about being bored. So get out of the house and go do something fun and get yourself on an adventure.
Yeah, I don't know how you can. I mean, I remember being bored a lot as well when I was younger, but I don't know how you could be bored now. There are so many things to learn and do. It's just, if you're bored, you haven't found the thing that excites you, or you haven't found the right people to hang out with.
So, as we know, you did the Andes recently. What inspired you to go and cycle the length of the Andes? And what was it like while you were in that experience?
What inspired me was that I've always done adventures that were about getting from point A to point B. And although the Andes adventure ended up being that, my friend and I wanted to explore the mountains. We both loved going up mountains. And so we thought, well, rather than just taking the shortest, most direct route possible, this is like life, really. It's like life philosophy. Rather than taking the shortest, most direct route possible through life, why don't we explore every single peak and pass that we can along the way, and just live day to day and enjoy every single day and every single moment. Let's not get het up on, I must make it to the finish line, because the reality is, and I learnt this in New Zealand, you have this goal and this big dream, and then you get there and there is a contentment, but like you said, it's fleeting. That happiness is fleeting. And actually what's more important is the day-to-day happiness, is the journey, so to speak, along the way. So we decided to cycle up lots of mountains because we love cycling up mountains. And it is an incredible landscape out there. I mean, most of the time, for the first 3 months of the trip, we were above 4,500 metres above sea level. The highest we got to was 5,900 metres, which on bicycles is pretty crazy because there's hardly any oxygen up there. And the landscapes, they were just unlike anything I'd seen before. They were Martian and red and dusty. And then in other areas where we'd cycle through Argentina, they'd be lush and green, or there'd be red rocks and it looked like a Wild West set. So the sheer variety of landscape in South America just blew me away. And being somewhere I couldn't speak the language, and I had to immerse myself in a different culture as well, for me was a fantastic reminder that we live in a small little bubble and the world does not exist in the way that we know it to. And I think knowing that helps you to broaden your horizons and actually realise that we may be different, but we're all humans at the end of the day, but we do have different ways of doing things. What would you say are the biggest benefits that you've gained out of all of these adventures and world travels? I would say the first thing is definitely a level of self-confidence, because I think at the end of the day I've realised, and I probably realised this quite early on at school, but what you're passionate about, the only thing that matters really is what you're passionate about and how you spend your days. You can spend a lot of time worrying about what other people think of you, but the reality is they're so concerned with what people think of them that they're only focused on themselves anyway. So, don't worry about that. Just make sure that you focus on what makes you happy, because everyday happiness leads to a happy life. And there's nothing like it when you're leading a life where you actually feel content and you feel fulfilled. The other thing I've learned is that it's lovely to do things for yourself and to make sure that you're happy, but actually there's this extra layer. And if you can manage to do something with your days or with your life that contributes something back to society, then that for me is the definition of success. That the definition of success for me is to leave the world a little bit better than you found it. And I love that idea. And so that's something that adventure has brought me. So all through my adventures, I've either fundraised or I've gone into schools along the way and I've talked to kids about adventure in the outdoors and just tried to give something back for the amazing life that I've had, because I'm so grateful for it. Yeah. Now, if anybody wanted to book you to come and speak at their school or in their organisation, or if they just wanted to learn more from you, they've been inspired by what you've had to say today, and they wanted to follow you maybe on social media or read your blog, where could people stay in touch with you and learn more from you? Yeah, so everything, the main hub for everything, for my speaking and all social feeds, is www.annamcnuff.com. Yeah. It should be really easy to find. I'm the only person with that name in the whole wide world, as far as I know, which is great. And then I'm on all the social feeds as well. So I'm at Anna McNuff on Instagram and Twitter. And then if you just search Anna McNuff on Facebook, you'll find my adventure page. And it's those social feeds that I use to tell stories. So you can go and immerse yourself in all the stories from the Andes and enjoy 6 6 months of virtual adventure.
Well, we'll be sure to share those links in the show notes to today's episode, and I recommend that people do it. I've been looking at your photographs and been inspired by them. You also say some really profound things as well at certain points on your journey that are great life lessons as well. So really encourage people to go and follow the blog and follow the social media channels. I'm sure you'll get a lot out of it. Anna, as we wrap things up here, I always finish by asking our guests, it's the Unstoppable Teen podcast. So in your opinion, what do you believe it takes to be unstoppable?
I think that you need to remember that being unique is a wonderful thing. And there is only one of you in the world. And the only person that's going to make the most of your life is you. You have the choice over it. You have the control over it. And being the unique individual that you are, you have the ability to make the biggest difference with even the smallest of your actions. Making your mum a cup of tea or picking something up for someone else when they've dropped it on the floor. So I would say embrace how unique you are. Don't shy away from it and try and do little things that help other people out.
They are fantastic messages. And for all of the other things that you shared with us throughout this episode, I am incredibly grateful that you've joined us from the Alps at the end of a very long adventure to share those experiences and share your tips and advice. Thanks so much for giving us your time. And on behalf of all the listeners, let us wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
There you go, folks. That was the mischief maker, the adventurer herself, Anna McNuff. I feel like I've got one of the best jobs in the world where I get to chat and learn from these fantastic people. If you want to get a hold of the show notes to today's episode, simply go to unstoppableteen.com/42. That's the number 42. It's episode 42. So go to unstoppableteen.com/42. We'll make sure that there are links in there to the books that Anna talked about, to her website and her social media channels. But we're also going to make sure that you can download that activity sheet. That one that Anna talked about where if you've got a goal, but you've got some fears and some concerns and self-doubt that might be holding you back, and then on the other side of the sheet where you can actually start to design the solutions and combat those issues. If you'd like to download that cheat sheet, as we'd call it, then simply go to unstoppableteen.com/42. As always, if you like this and you feel like you know a young person or a friend, a family member, a student, or whatever it may be, that could benefit from it, maybe they've got themselves in a bit of a rut. Maybe they're a little bit apathetic, disengaged with life. Maybe they haven't found their passion yet. Maybe they're not excited and have hopes and dreams and aspirations. Maybe this recording, this conversation, listening to what Anna had to say, could be the thing that sparks their curiosity, stimulates their creativity, and takes their life to the next level. So please do feel free to share it. And of course, subscribe to the show. You can do that on iTunes. You can do that on YouTube now. Or the easiest way is to go to unstoppableteen.com/subscribe, and we'll be making sure that every week we share hints and tips and strategies to help young people have a better life. So that's pretty much it for this week. I'm looking forward to returning again next week where we'll help you become truly unstoppable. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.